You're listening to Paranormal Optimist. My name is Stephanie, and in this podcast, we dissect paranormal topics from the perspective of skeptics, believers, and everyone in between. At the end, it's up to you to decide. Are you a paranormal optimist? And we're back with another episode of Paranormal Optimist. Before we get ahead of ourselves, remember that you can find where to follow the show by clicking the link in the episode description. And it's just one link now because I remembered that Linktree exists. If you'd like to share your story for the podcast, be a guest on the show, suggest an episode, or collaborate in some other way I'm not thinking of, send an email to paranormaloptimist@gmail.com. Last time, we had some fun discussing the Monroe Bigfoot sighting with friends of the show, Jessica and April. Keeping up with this momentum, I thought today would be a good time to take a deep dive into the world of cryptozoology. Because honestly, if I'm not careful, I will just talk about aliens in every single episode. So let's keep the cryptid talk going. I may be all about discussing the mysteries of the universe and the possibility of life, but there's a lot more worthwhile discussions to be had in the fringe world that is the paranormal. Cryptozoology is a fascinating topic because it somehow manages to occupy this space in the public consciousness that labels it as both more and less believable than extraterrestrial life. How is that possible? Stay tuned. For this episode, we will first lay out the history of cryptozoology. We'll talk about its origin story and how it's changed to meet the needs of the modern paranormal enthusiast. We'll talk about some big names from the field and the contributions they made to the search for these strange animals. Then we'll dive into a discussion about why people don't believe in the merits of cryptozoology, why people have a hard time accepting the plausibility of creatures like Bigfoot, Nessie, or my boy, Mothman. After that, we'll look at how people can still find themselves to be believers even today. We'll point out some surprising discoveries and discuss the true value the search for the unknown has in a world that is continuously losing itself to modernity. Finally, to wrap up, we'll discuss what to do with this information. Let's get started. Let's talk about the history of cryptozoology. Monsters, fantastic creatures, unknown animals, hidden animals, whatever you want to call them. They have always existed. You see them in paintings, statues, and even built into the architecture of ancient buildings. You see them in mythology and in religious texts, and even in historical documents. Like many ideas with a supernatural or paranormal flavor, belief in these fringe animals has mutated over time from a commonly held public belief based on shared experiences in oral history to something that was absorbed and appropriated by different powers over time. Christianity, for example, has absorbed different magical beasts into its iconography for different reasons over time. Dragons have been depicted in paintings to represent pride or even Satan himself. Paintings of unicorns, on the other hand, have been thought to represent ideas such as purity, humility, and the all-encompassing idea of Christ. These animals that used to be real in the public consciousness became metaphors, cautionary tales to guide society down a desired path. Cryptids became a means to a cultural end. To glaze over a lot of history here, there was a general cultural shift during the Renaissance, which moved people away from religion and towards science when it came to explaining our world and our place in it. This brought about a new interest in natural history, which led many to conclude that the myths and legends of strange animals were just that, myths and legends. Nothing more, nothing less. Luckily for us, though, just as was the case with the history of questioning whether we are alone in the universe, there were some weirdos out there, even back then, who were willing to believe in something different. The year 1820 marks the death of Pierre Denis de Montfort. He was a malacologist, a zoologist specializing in the study of mollusks. So he was an expert regarding animals such as snails, clams, mussels, oysters, and most importantly for our story today, squids and octopuses. Side note, you would not believe how much controversy exists in the grammar nerd circles regarding whether we should be saying octopi or octopuses. My entire life I have been saying octopi, so that's what I want to say today. But it does seem like the more accepted term in English is now octopuses, so that's what I'll try to use today. Back to the story. He believed in the existence and reality of giant squids and octopuses, and argued that they could have been the origin for the legends of the Kraken. He based this belief not only on reported sightings and anecdotes, but also on the discovery of an 8-meter-long tentacle found in the mouth of a sperm whale in the early 1780s. Unfortunately, it does seem that he let this small bit of physical evidence, as valid as it was, become the basis of overzealous and hasty conclusions in his work as a molocologist. He claimed that the mysterious and very public tragedy of the overnight disappearance of 10 British warships in 1782 was the result of giant octopus attacks. When the dust settled and actual survivors of the shipwrecks came forward, it was revealed that the ships sunk due to encountering an unexpected hurricane at sea. So despite all of the amazing and pioneering discoveries he made in the field of molluscology, de Montfort's career was ruined, and he never recovered. He died poor, alone, and disgraced in 1820. Adding insult to injury, the giant squid was officially accepted to be real by the scientific community in 1857, only 37 years later. Over the 37 years, more and more pieces of giant squid bodies washed up on beaches or were found inside the bodies of other animals like whales. It got to the point where the evidence outweighed the skepticism, and everyone finally had to admit to the existence of these creatures, even if they'd never seen one alive. As a bit of trivia, the first photographical evidence of a living giant squid was captured in 2004. While de Montfort's claim that the Kraken destroyed those ships in 1782 was disproven, most researchers do admit that the bulk of Kraken lore can logically be attributed to the existence of actual giant squid in the waters. His story reads like a cautionary tale for both believers and skeptics, in my opinion. Yeah, it's so much more fun to believe in the weird and the strange, but if you're going to stake your career, livelihood, or actual life on those beliefs, you have to have evidence. If you are going to convince others that your belief is valid, you have the responsibility to back up those claims. Cite your sources, man. For the skeptics, of course, they don't have to have evidence. They have things easier in that regard, because all they have to do is not believe in something. But they do run the risk of being on the wrong side of history. In some cases, when they finally do open up their eyes to the truth, they might find someone else's blood on their hands. While de Montfort was a great example of a martyr in the field of cryptozoology, the truth is that he did not consider himself to be a cryptozoologist, because that word didn't even exist until 1959. Bernard Heuvelmans, an explorer, researcher, scientist, and author of such books as On the Track of Unknown Animals, is considered to be the founder of cryptozoology. Wikipedia actually labels him as the father of the pseudoscience and subculture of cryptozoology, which I assume is a title he would not have enjoyed. Regardless, it was Heuvelmans who coined the term cryptozoology in 1959, before spending the rest of his life dedicating himself to the field. Despite the fact that his book was titled On the Track of Unknown Animals, he was known to have preferred the term hidden animals to describe cryptids. In his opinion, these animals were not unknown to the world at large, they were simply unknown to science. These weren't magical creatures. They were actual living organisms known to exist by different groups of people, yet somehow hidden from researchers of modern science. In 1982, the ISC, or the International Society for Cryptozoology, was founded as a professional organization that brought together scientists, wildlife experts, and lay investigators. The mission statement of the ISC was this: to promote scientific inquiry, education, and communication among people interested in animals of unexpected form or size, or unexpected occurrence in time and space. Under the ISC, the definition of cryptid was expanded to include known animals in areas where they should not exist, as well as those animals who have continued to exist even though they were believed to be extinct. The following is a direct quote from Heuvelmans that speaks to how he would define cryptids and cryptozoologists. Hidden animals, with which cryptozoology is concerned, are by definition very incompletely known. To gain more credence, they have to be documented as carefully and exhaustively as possible by a search through the most diverse fields of knowledge. Cryptozoological research thus requires not only a thorough grasp of most of the zoological sciences, including, of course, physical anthropology, but also a certain training in such extraneous branches of knowledge as mythology, linguistics, archaeology, and history. Per Heuvelmans' definition, cryptozoology is a discipline that is anchored in society and culture. Because of this, he contended that the bulk of the work of cryptozoologists should be conducted in places like libraries, archives, and museums. So what's the problem? Let's dive in to why people argue that you shouldn't believe in cryptids or the entire field of cryptozoology. Why not to believe? The debate over the validity of cryptozoology hinges on whether or not it can be or should be called a science. We all already know what science is, but it's helpful to just state the definition here to showcase the problems the scientific community has with cryptozoology. Science is the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation, experimentation, and the testing of theories against the evidence obtained. Cryptozoology is famously considered to be a pseudoscience, as in something that is not science posing as science. The reason for this is because cryptozoology does not entirely exist in the realm of science. It relies heavily on sociological and cultural elements. To showcase the dissonance between science and cryptozoology, I looked into which topics scientists were more likely to seriously investigate, aliens or cryptids. I was initially surprised to learn that as a whole, the scientific community is actually far more comfortable with the idea of aliens than they are with the belief in unexpected animals. Once you understand their reasoning, though, it's really not that hard to believe. So why is science more likely to accept an interstellar being than they are a weird animal on Earth? Methodology. The search for extraterrestrial life can be executed within the framework of the scientific method. Observations, data collection, and testing of hypotheses. Fields like astrobiology are well established, well respected, and well equipped for this pursuit. Cryptozoology does incorporate parts of scientific methodology into its framework when possible, but it is often left with major gaps that are filled in with decidedly unscientific elements. Cryptozoology focuses on things like cultural history, studies of mythology and folklore, and our reliance on anecdotes and eyewitness testimonies in lieu of actual physical evidence. Plausibility. Given the vastness of the universe, the existence of some form of extraterrestrial life is considered extremely plausible, even if we do not yet have any physical evidence to prove it. Cryptids, however, are viewed with skepticism because there is no physical evidence. Logically, the barriers to finding life on Earth are nothing compared to those which prevent us from finding life off Earth. If it exists here, there simply should be physical evidence that can be examined. That is the thought process. There's also the element of biological implausibility associated with stories of specific cryptids, such as animals surviving in habitats unsuited to them, or animals of extreme sizes. In my opinion, which nobody should really care about, cryptozoology seems to toe the line between several different disciplines without truly ever finding a place to belong. Just because it's not a hard science, though, doesn't mean that nothing discovered through the study of cryptozoology is worthwhile or true. The problem seems to stem fully from the field being presented as a science when it simply cannot ever truly fit in that box. So it's not a science. Is that such a huge problem? History isn't a science. It's subjective, but it's still a valid pursuit of knowledge. So what's wrong with believing in cryptids? cryptids. In my research, I came across a book called Abominable Science: Origins of the Yeti, Nessie, and Other Famous Cryptids by Daniel Loxton and Donald R. Prothero. This was an interesting read and a great source for the skeptical among us who would still like to learn about the history of monsters. Loxton was the more sympathetic of the two authors when it came to the harmless nature of having an interest in cryptids. He argued that an interest in cryptozoology is what led him into the study of more serious sciences. Prothero, on the other hand, had a lot to say about the dangers inherent to cryptozoology. Holding no punches, Prothero argued that public interest in cryptozoology wastes time, wastes resources, and feeds into the general culture of ignorance, pseudoscience, and anti-science. He contends that a public acceptance of pseudoscience can lead to less acceptance of actual science. Possible problematic outcomes of this, he suggests, are less trust in medicine and the overall healthcare system. As an aside, as someone who has worked her entire career in the healthcare industry, I think that this is a very real problem, but I never would have thought to blame Bigfoot for it. This is a compelling argument, though. It led me to try to find out if there was actually any evidence that proved that believing in cryptids caused any direct harm to the believer. So, does belief in cryptids actually lead to an ignorance of science? In short, based on my surface level research, the answer is it's complicated. It seems to be a case where there is some correlation, but not necessarily causation. The overall fear being that believing in unsubstantiated ideas, such as the existence of specific cryptids, leaves people more susceptible to believing in all kinds of misinterpretations and misdirection. An idea that is certainly dangerous, but there doesn't seem to be any concrete evidence that this is actually happening. Again, nobody is asking for my opinion, but this does feel like blaming an entire field of research for the shortcomings of individuals. People need to think for themselves. Believing in one fringe idea doesn't mean that all fringe ideas are true. It also doesn't mean that all mainstream ideas are a lie or a conspiracy. Having a genuine interest in something is not the same thing as blindly believing in every story. You can be interested in cryptids and still want evidence. I don't think cryptozoology is a trap that leads to scientific ignorance. But general ignorance certainly can lead to scientific ignorance. Why to believe? So, we have talked about some valid criticism for the field of cryptozoology. In light of this, how can people today still believe? We spoke before about Heuvelmans' view of the field and how he thought cryptozoology should be pursued. Comparing Heuvelmans' definition of cryptozoology with the skeptical pop culture view of modern cryptozoology is a bit jarring. This view is one where amateur outdoors people participate in pseudoscience to prove the existence of beasts without any regard for the scientific method. While certainly this is the case for many out there looking at you cable networks, there are still individuals continuing to do serious work in the pursuit of discovery. As far as modern cryptozoology is concerned, one major name to know is Loren Coleman. So, who is he and what has he done to further public acceptance of the field? Loren Coleman, not to be confused with the science fiction writer with the same name, is a cryptozoologist who also holds a master's degree in psychiatric social work. His educational background also includes study in anthropology, zoology, and sociology. Honestly, if you've watched any mainstream paranormal documentaries or have read basically any book on cryptozoology, you have probably seen or heard of Loren Coleman before. Coleman has spent a lot of time in the public eye as a cryptozoologist. He has carried out work in the field, appeared on NPR and television, and has also written over 40 books on topics such as popular culture, animal mysteries, folklore, and of course, cryptozoology. On top of all of this, he also founded the International Cryptozoology Museum in Portland, Maine in 2003. The museum started off as his own personal collection of life-size cryptid replicas, casts of footprints, letters, photos, samples of hair, bone, and other biologic evidence, and also cryptid memorabilia, such as toys and other merchandise. In a 2022 interview done by by a magazine local to Maine, simply titled The Maine Mag, Coleman described his over 60 years of experience in the field tracking Bigfoot. When asked by the magazine whether he believed in Bigfoot, which I thought was an odd question considering he'd been hunting the cryptid for 6 decades, he had this to say: "I believe in nothing, and I'm open-minded to everything. The evidence that I see, the tracks, the hair samples, the animals that are preyed upon, those are all the physical evidence. I don't get into the paranormal, and I'm more into my philosophical internal clock or network of taking information in. I don't investigate a Bigfoot report and believe that report. Instead, I accept or deny the evidence." Any criticism I see associated with Coleman simply seems to mirror the criticism for cryptozoology in general. He's been called things like gullible and biased towards pseudoscience for espousing some specific beliefs regarding cryptid cases. In response to his critics, he told the Maine Mag this: "There are people who accept everything. They hear a noise in the woods, and they think it's a flying demon or a dragon or a thunderbird or a Bigfoot. And on the other end, there are the debunkers, the skeptics with a big S. It doesn't bother me. I really don't put a lot of energy into arguing with people, and I'm absolutely not evangelical about cryptozoology." For me, the most obvious reason to continue to believe is that we are discovering new animals every single day. We already talked about de Montfort and his posthumous vindication with the official discovery of the giant squid. But that is only one example of a creature moving from the unknown to the known category. Because that's the thing with cryptids. Once you discover them, they're not cryptids anymore. In his book, The United States of Cryptids, A Tour of American Myths and Monsters, J.W. Ocker calls this the cryptozoologist's curse. It's the idea that once the investigator does their job and proves the existence of their target, it becomes an animal. Cryptozoology loses their cryptid, and zoology gains a new animal. The list of animals which zoology has gained from cryptozoology may surprise you, because it surprised me. Let's discuss a few of them now. Platypus. How much do you know about the platypus? It's an egg-laying mammal that has the feet of an otter, the tail of a beaver, the bill of a duck, and oh yeah, it's venomous. This animal is so bizarre that when Europeans first learned of its existence in the 18th and 19th centuries, they wrote it off as a hoax. It contradicted basically everything they thought was true or possible in the animal kingdom. It took nearly 100 years for the Western world to admit that the animal existed. Komodo dragon. Prior to the 1900s, it was a widely held belief that large lizards, like the Komodo dragon, did not exist in the modern world. Despite the many stories from people native to areas where these animals lived and the anecdotes from fishermen who had spotted them, it wasn't until 1926, when a museum-sponsored expedition into Indonesia brought back 2 living Komodo dragons, that the scientific establishment finally had to admit that they were real. Gorillas. This one was surprising to me. I guess it does sort of make sense when you think about it from the perspective of an early explorer from the Western world in an amazingly biologically diverse place like Africa. This animal sounds like a cryptid. It's a strong, powerful, hairy, human-like creature living in the mountains and jungles. I mean, it sounds like Bigfoot. Despite the fact that there were groups of people native to areas near gorilla habitats who had seen them and interacted with them for generations, gorillas did not earn animal status until bones were brought back by an American missionary working in Liberia in 1847. An unfortunate result of this was the then massive effort to hunt and capture these amazing creatures. These animals are just some examples of creatures who are able to move from one category to the other as the result of continued investigation into the question of their existence. This doesn't even touch upon the massive numbers of sea creatures being discovered each year, or even animals which were previously believed to be extinct being proven to still exist today. Classification of cryptids, or along these lines, possible animals, can be broken down into several different categories. While the list of available categories does seem to change based on what source you're referencing, I did find a few that will probably be familiar to most fans of the paranormal. Humanoid cryptids. Often described as large, hairy, and bipedal, with variations in size and appearance. An example here, of course, would be Bigfoot, or the Yeti. Aquatic or semi-aquatic cryptids. These creatures are typically associated with water bodies like lakes, rivers, or oceans. Examples would be things like Nessie, or the Ogopogo, or Champy, or any number of sea serpents and other lake monsters. Winged monsters. These cryptids have varying descriptions from large, bird-like creatures to humanoid figures with wings. Examples here would be Mothman or Thunderbirds. If these categories sound just a little too spicy for you, there are also more mundane ways to catalog cryptids. Here I have two examples. Oops. That's OOPS, out of place species. These are creatures that do exist, but should not exist in the place where they are being sighted. Examples here would be things like phantom kangaroos or big cats being spotted in places like the UK or other strange habitats. Both of these types of cryptids have actually been spotted where I live, in Michigan, so those are out-of-place species. Extinct. This one is pretty self-explanatory. These are animals that are known to have existed, but are not believed to still be alive today. The most famous example here is the coelacanth, which had been believed to have died out millions of years ago, but was discovered to actually still be alive in our oceans today. If you are of the belief that creatures like Nessie are actually plesiosaurs, or that Bigfoot is actually a gigantopithecus, those would also be examples of this category, although obviously not proven or substantiated yet. But is the discovery and classification of new animals the only valuable takeaway from the study of cryptids? What now? So what do we do with this information? Why should we continue to investigate when the debate between science and cryptozoology has created such a minefield? If a creature possibly isn't even real, why should we care about it? The most interesting thing about cryptozoology, or just cryptids in general, is that there is this whole other layer to their significance that is something beyond whether or not they actually exist. This quote from J.W. Acker is a good introduction to this idea. Whatever you think about cryptids, the stories are true. These stories and the effect they have on our culture is real, regardless of whether or not the creature physically exists. Towns tie their local cryptids to their identity. Mothman is part of Point Pleasant. Champy, the monster alleged to exist in Lake Champlain, is fought over by the two towns on its border, Port Henry in New York and Burlington in Vermont. Both states currently have legislation on record that gives the creature a protected legal status. Cryptids bring people together and create a sense of shared history and community, not to mention the fact that cryptotourism in the USA alone generates more than $140 million annually. In my episode about Oumuamua, I mentioned that how people reacted to the discovery of Oumuamua was more important than what the object actually was. It's the same idea with cryptids. The story of the cryptid, in a lot of cases, is more important than the biological plausibility of it. To take another quote from Acker, cryptids are hopeful concepts. Hope that the world still is a diverse place, full of discovery. Hope that humankind hasn't zoned every square inch of the planet for McDonald's franchises. Hope that we haven't grown bored with our mother planet. Hope that she still harbors wonders for us. So what can the modern person with a general interest in cryptozoology do? We talked about cryptotourism. There are lots of outlets to get your harmless cryptid fix. You can attend festivals like Squonkapalooza in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, or the Mothman Festival in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Two things that are definitely on my bucket list. You can also visit museums, such as the International Cryptozoology Museum, which we already mentioned, in Portland, Maine. Today, if you want to learn about cryptozoology, it's a pretty easy thing to do. You can go to the library and check out books. You can do a Google search and find online communities and even local research organizations. The founding of the field of cryptozoology has created a culture all its own that exists whether science accepts it or not. A lot has changed since 1959, but public interest in cryptids has not gone away. We started off this episode with a discussion about the history of cryptozoology. We talked about de Montfort and how he's a cautionary tale for both skeptics and believers. We discussed why the world of science doesn't accept cryptozoology and the very real dangers of believing too much in something without basing that belief in fact and reality. We We talked about why people do still find themselves gravitating towards cryptozoology and the great discoveries that resulted because of it. We closed out by talking about the big picture value of cryptids, the idea that their worth does not lie solely in their physical existence. As always, I'm not telling you what to believe. As we've already discussed, there's an irrefutable element of harm associated with not thinking for yourself. So what do you think about cryptids and cryptozoology? Are you an optimist? Let me know. If you'd like to share your story for the podcast, be a guest on the show, suggest an episode, or collaborate, send me an email at paranormaloptimist@gmail.com. Go to the episode description to see where you can follow the show and check out the sources I cited in today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Paranormal Optimist. This show was written, produced, and presented by me, Stephanie. The music in today's episode was obtained royalty-free from Purple Planet Music. See you next time!